Welcome to Corey-osity Unleashed, where we turn bold ideas into action and help businesses and leaders step it up.
We're your hosts, Deborah and Ken, obsessed with fresh takes, bold moves, and shaking up the way we lead and work.
Alongside our amazing guests, we'll dive into the good, the bad, and the actual what the hell of the workplace, served with a side of sarcasm and a splash of wisdom.
Oh, and fair warning, this is an adult podcast. Expect swearing, like Ken just did, brutal honesty, and the occasional dramatic reenactment of some of the most epic workplace fails we've ever seen.
Or done. So grab your drink, get comfy, and let's unleash some Corey-osity.
Welcome, everyone, to this very special podcast where we have a very special guest, Ian Pettigrew, who I had the honor of meeting when I did a volunteering trip for Hope for Justice in Ethiopia. And have you ever met someone where it's just automatically you just completely sync? You think very similar. You've got a similar approach to work. It was absolutely brilliant. And he was my buddy on the trip, you know, helping me and help because I had never done anything like this before. And when he shared all the information about his new book that just came out, I said, please, can you be on the podcast? So long story short, Ian, thank you so much for joining us today on this podcast.
Oh, thanks, Deborah. And right back at you for how I felt and how it was to spend time with you and get to know you properly on the trip.
Yeah, we'll have to do another podcast, bring everybody back, all the volunteers, and just talk about the trip and what we learned there. Absolutely. So why don't I do this? I'm going to introduce Ian and then we're going to jump right to the questions. Okay. So hold tight. Ian has so much experience and so many degrees. This is going to take me about 2 minutes to read it all through, but there you go. So Ian is a coach and leadership development consultant who focuses, I love this, on helping leaders inspire hope, which is what we're going to be talking about today. He's a Gallup certified strengths coach, a fellow member of the Association for Coaching, a member of the Association for Business Psychology, has an MSc in Applied Positive Psychology and Coaching Psychology, and was named as one of HR's most influential thinkers. No surprise. He champions hope as a strategy through speaking, coaching, and taking on personal challenges such as cycling the height of Everest. So Ken knows nothing about this. So before we get into like practical questions, do you want to explain what this challenge is that you're doing?
Yeah, so during lockdown, I broke my ankle really, really badly. I slipped on snow on top of ice, and a little sort of path had just frozen completely, slipped, heard several loud cracks, thought that was not good, and then discovered what a trimalleolar fracture is, which is where you've broken all three major bones. So I've got one ankle that is absolutely packed full of metalwork. And
you are an overachiever, Ian. You know, instead of just one bone, you had to crack three.
I don't do anything by halves. That has been said before. I've also only got two speeds, 100 mile an hour and stop. So it's kind of, I don't do subtlety and shades. I've either got like on or off. I'm either going to break it and break it badly or not break it at all. And it took quite a while to recover, you know, a lot of physio, a lot of work. And I enjoyed indoor cycling anyway. I've always said I'll do anything to support the Hope for Justice. So I came up with this crazy idea, which is kind of like when I can walk again, what if I aimed to do this challenge where on an indoor bike, I would do a hill climb, a simulation, and I would climb it. It's a well-known challenge until I've climbed enough height that is 29,029 feet, the height of Everest. I am still training for it 4 years after breaking my ankle. Having committed to do it, I didn't realise the magnitude of the challenge. Basically, when I do it, which I'm hoping will be this year now as I'm training really hard, it's the equivalent for me of doing 4 marathons back to back in a day. It's going to be about 16 hours. I'll be doing it by riding a simulation of one of the Tour de France stages, Alpe d'Huez. and I'll repeat that 8.5 times in the day. And so it's,
Goodness.
I must admit, whenever I fly now, when the plane takes off, I'm sort of looking at how much it climbs to get to 29,000 feet and thinking like, yeah, that's quite a long way. So yeah,
Yes.
that's my Everesting challenge that I'm still training for.
I have to confess, when I heard Deborah say bicycle the height of Everest, I'm thinking Everest is what, about 6 miles up, and I do about 6 miles on my bike every day. I mean, it's no big deal, right? What's the big? But then
Vertical.
yeah. Yeah, I don't read my exercise bike vertical. Yeah, no.
It's a well-known challenge, and you can do it. You can do it in the real world. So the rule is you pick a hill, and you just have to repeat the same hill until the elevation adds up. So, and there's badges you get. It's an official challenge for like quarter, half, and full Everesting. So, and I like a challenge. When I can lock onto a target, guess we're talking about hope already. It kind of gives me something to focus on, and I've changed. I've lost a lot of weight. I've got a lot fitter. I've changed the way I eat. I've focused on nutrition. I sleep a lot better now. It's kind of, little did I realise just how much change it would need for me to be able to get up there. And all the time in the background, I'm progressively getting older as well, so probably making it slightly harder for myself. So this is the year for that challenge. I'll hopefully in another couple of months I'll set a date, and I'll be asking for a lot of support. I'll need a lot of encouragement on that date and reminding about why I'm doing it.
You all heard that, and it's for a great charity, Hope for Justice. So perfect. So that is a good segue. Again, we're talking about hope is a strategy. That everybody can see that. This brilliant, brilliant book. But before we jump into the book, can we just learn a little bit about you? We've already learned about that you like a good challenge and that you are an overachiever. But talk a little bit about your story and your journey, and like what brought you to do all the things that you've achieved so far and want to continue to achieve.
That's such a big question, and it's like so hard to sort of reflect on that. So without making this like a full chapter of a book, grew up in Liverpool in a bit of a rough area. Never had much money as a kid. Was the first in my family to go to university. I was the sort of the bright kid in the school. Sorry, that sounds really boasty, doesn't it? But
probably the troublemaker though too. Right, and troublemaker maybe. No,
not at that time.
Okay. That came out later.
That definitely came out later. Troublemaker I could also be a tough kid if you started it with me. I learned I needed to do that as the kind of like the kid that wanted to read more and study and do things like that. So learned how to defend myself. Let's put it that way in that environment. Went to uni. My first degree is applied statistics and computing. Bit of a geek at heart, like my technology, like thinking things through. Then worked in chemical and pharmaceutical, ICI, AstraZeneca. Did 20 years there, lots of different roles. Did a secondment into a commercial role. I'm far better at changing stuff than I am at maintaining the status quo. Perhaps back to your troublemaker comment there, Deborah. So, good at disrupting stuff, but don't enjoy. I'm not great at like managing a service. So did loads of work around, creating a benefits management capability, knowledge management, all sorts of interesting stuff. Discovered I love the technology, but I was much more interested in the people and the people aspects. So trained as a coach, along the way. Final job there was change director. So for R&D finance, so leading large scale organisational transformation. And then I got to the stage where I just thought, I'll talk more about this in a minute, but had that sort of life is short moment, a reminder, and really enjoyed part of my job. Enjoyed the bit of the job where I was getting to coach people and help people and support people. And I wanted that to be all my job. So in 2009, left to set up Kingfisher Coaching. What else did I do along the way? Did a postgrad in business, did a degree on theology, did a lot of training in day trading as well. And actually, when I left AstraZeneca, I didn't think I'd be able to make enough money to pay the mortgage as a coach. So my actual plan was to do three things. It was to trade currencies, pound against the dollar, which I'd always done as a bit of a hobby, and that would pay me money. Then I could kind of coach as a bit of a hobby, and then I could do some charity work and do some stuff that counted. Discovered that I could make enough money out of coaching to pay the mortgage, and enjoyed day trading as a hobby, hated it as a work thing because it added loads of pressure. So sort of loads. And then like you asked about what sort of shaped it. So it's interesting to reflect on the experiences. So like I've worked for some brilliant bosses. So I'm going to name check one, Thomas Ernstrom, who was just amazing. And, you know, even today, I just think about the extent to which he encouraged me, really helped me to lean into my strengths, maybe just boosted my confidence, and got me some coaching to help me with some stuff as well. So working for people like Thomas, absolutely fantastic. I also worked for a bully who was toxic, and nobody had the guts to tackle. And like the downside of that was that really knocked my confidence for a while, but it's actually left something with me that, you know, I won't be a bystander. I won't watch toxic behaviours or bullying. And, you know, I'm absolutely determined to call it out when I see it. 1999. So you mentioned, I've already talked about my breaking my ankle. My medical history is that I never ever see my doctor, you know, thankfully everything's good. And then suddenly I seem to end up in trauma and orthopedics about once every 20 years. So 1999, Donington Park, racetrack, had a motorbike accident. Somebody slowed down on the racing line. I had nowhere to go. And I did what's called a high side, which is where the bike slips from underneath you and then suddenly finds grip and it just stops and sort of throws you. So I bounced several times, landed up in the gravel trap quite a distance away from where I'd come off the bike. The bike bounced several times, thankfully missed me. Race photographer ran over, took one look at me, won't repeat the language they used, and ran off. And I'd broken quite a few things really badly, and it was not in a good way. And it took me, I think I was off work for about 4 or 5 months. It took me, you know, a long time before I could walk again. Even probably like a year later, you know, I was walking with a really pronounced limp. Had, I think, 6 operations in total, you know, to sort of repair everything. But the thing that stuck with me at the time was that work was rubbish at the time. And I remember thinking, if I don't make it through this, you know, if I don't live and I don't survive this now, I will be really annoyed with the way that I've lived my life and the way that I let work be for me for a while. So it's like, I wasn't panicking about dying. I was just thinking, like, really annoyed with myself for what I'd allowed to happen. And I think that was one of the big things sort of behind me leaving AstraZeneca, taking a leap of faith and setting up my own business. Final thing I'd say that's been a massive influence is when I left AstraZeneca, not long after that, I went to Kampala, Uganda, to stay with a friend. And that was in 2010. And that was the first time I sort of just really encountered both the fact that there's a big world of need out there, but also to be inspired by the people I met, to see how misguided so many charitable interventions are. There's an amazing book called When Helping Hurts, you know, about the kind of damage that clumsy interventions can do, but also to see the power of the right kind of support. So there's probably loads more, but I think those are the kind of bits and experiences that have kind of probably made me who I am and kind of drive me to do what I do.
Fantastic. No, I love that because it does, you know, it shows what can happen when different things happen to you and how you embrace it and how you use it for your journey. So no, Brilliant. Which again is a good segue into the book. Ken, do you want to start jumping onto questions about the book?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm amazed with all these accidents that
Yeah.
I guess you sort of had to keep hope at some point just to
Yeah.
get through them all. But for this book, you conducted a lot of research, extensive research. What were some of the most interesting or surprising insights you discovered?
Oh, I think there's loads, and I think sort of the first one is probably how much research that already was on hope. So much really good quality studies completed around the world, but it isn't well known. And I guess that's one of the things that bothers me, is that there's a lot in psychology that isn't that well known because it's kind of hidden behind paywalls and it's in people's brains, and it often feels like people are having to sort of reinvent psychology. So I already was familiar, and had been for quite a few years, with some of the research, but the more I dug, and when I did a literature review, I was really amazed by how much good quality research there was. I guess the biggest surprise was about the origins of hope. So Snyder, key figure, he was doing research into the psychology of making excuses, and big research project. And people talked about, why they made excuses. It might be excuses for not going to the gym or not doing something or whatever it might be. And in that research, people wanted to talk about kind of the opposite and the upside. And so Snyder started to research that as well. And that was the foundational research into hope, the opposite of making excuses. And I know it's not that simple, but that was a big sort of surprise for me. So that's all about pre-existing research. My own academic research was a thematic analysis. It was called Is Hope a Strategy? And by the title of the book, you can guess what conclusion I came to. But in my research, conducting interviews with lots of leaders, I guess the two big surprises for me, firstly, like in the research, I talk about it as the antecedents of hope, the things you need to be in place already. But actually, just to put it bluntly, some leaders have already scuppered themselves. They've made false promises through their behaviour. People don't believe them. People don't trust them. Suspect we'll talk about trust a little bit later as we dive deeper. But I was surprised. I sort of almost thought I was going to find a magic formula that, a leader could use and could build hope. But some people have already screwed it up 6 months earlier. So that surprised me. And then the other one, I guess, is oh, sorry, go on, Ken.
I do apologize. I didn't mean to interrupt. When we talk about our book and the bad bosses that we write about, we always start from the point that almost nobody wakes up in the morning saying that I'm going to be a bad boss. I'm going to hurt somebody. I'm going to have a bad. Did you find that as well? That these bosses that have already scuppered themselves, they didn't do it on purpose. It's just their habits, their behaviors, their regular MO sort of got in their own way.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to a sort of a. I am trying to genuinely address a gap here, because Gallup's research that was released at the World Government Summit that looks into not leadership but followership identified hope as the number one thing that people all around the world are asking for from leaders. So they're looking for hope. If you did an audit of leadership programs, how many leaders are being taught about hope and to help other people find hope? It's just, I think, something that is rare to encounter. So I think it was that, again, like a lot of leadership, as you say, people haven't been taught to do this stuff. So if you haven't been taught how to find hope for yourself or how to help people find hope, no wonder you're going to get it wrong. You're going to do your best. You're going to copy other people. You'll muddle through with what you think works. And some of the things are counterintuitive, so it doesn't necessarily work. And so I think it's kind of in the nicest, and I mean this in the nicest, most compassionate way, there's a lot of ignorance. We're trying to help people find hope, but we just don't know how to do it.
Well, and it is a skill, as Ken mentioned in our book, we talk about different tools and different skills that leaders know to be great. And, you don't wake up in the morning and all of a sudden you know how to be authentic, you know how to be vulnerable, you know how to inspire, you know how to do hope. So it's almost like we tell our bosses, give your people more hope, give your people more hope. But to your point, they don't know how to do it. So, which actually I'm gonna change my question, because I realized that we didn't start from the beginning, which is, why did you decide to write the book? You said something about a gap, but what made you decide at this point in time? You're already running 500 miles an hour. Probably the last thing in the world you need to do is write a book. Why did you decide to do it? Because I know from experience how much work it takes to write a book.
I've wanted to do it for ages. I optimize for impact all the time. You know, it's what matters to me more than anything. So if you give me a choice between, you know, running a workshop that's going to pay me a load of money and running a workshop that's going to make a big impact, I'll always prioritize impact. You know, that's what drives me. And I think as I get older, that sort of focus shifts more towards legacy a little bit, about wanting to sort of put something out there. There's loads of different strands. I think one is that, you know, a workshop I ran in Uganda with people that we know, Kelly Swingler and David Faulkner, and with Katrina Collier and with George Wally. You know, it started off as a workshop in goal setting that didn't really excite me. And then on the day, as I was stood there, it turned into a workshop on hope. I just didn't know it at the time. So hope it's kind of one of those things that has been a massive theme throughout my life, even if I didn't know what it was called at the time. And it's like from everything from, like Ken made a comment a few minutes ago about sort of, you know, getting over the motorbike accident or the broken, you know, about what it's taken me to get over that. That's hope. You know, that's sitting there at home, you know, with my leg after surgery, knowing I've got more surgery, and thinking, right, I want to be able to walk again. And in fact, I want to be able to run again. And having to accept a lot of stuff, but knowing that actually there's a lot I can do to make that a reality. And then my experience of going to the physio and saying, you know, they said, right, a few weeks ago, we said, you know, you could do this exercise and, you know, have you done anything? And I'm like, yeah, of course I have. You know, I've done the exercise 50 times a day. And then being surprised because most people take the exercises and don't do them. So hope has always sort of just been there. And then I did in my master's, one of my early research projects was a self-reflection. And it was interesting that even though I score highly as having hope as a trait, I didn't feel hopeful at the time. And I was really interested about why that would be different. And that's when I started to research hope, and then started to really understand that kind of, well, hope is teachable and it's learnable. You know, it's not an accident. Hope is something that anybody could learn. And hope can exist even in the most difficult of circumstances as well. I've interviewed people about hope in end-of-life care. You know, one of the classic works on hope is Man's Search for Meaning, you know, Viktor Frankl, where he writes about his experience as a prisoner in the concentration camps. So, you know, hope can exist in the most difficult of circumstances. So I had this nagging idea that wouldn't go away. And what's the book? Is it not Eat, Sleep, Pray? I can't remember the name of it, but that book that talks about an idea will visit you and it will hover around you for a little bit. And if you're not up for it, you know, and kind of you're not into it, it'll leave you, you know, it'll go and find somebody else. And I remember that sort of, that quote and that passage of the book just sticking with me and thinking, I've got something here, you know, that I want to get out there. And one of the bits of feedback I'm getting about the book is people saying, oh, it's a surprisingly easy read. And I'm so pleased about that
absolutely.
Because,
yep.
well, thank you, because I've worked hard to try and distill something, because I'm not trying to, through the book, you know, again, I see this in the work that you do. We're not trying to show how clever we are. We're trying to show other people how clever and capable they are. Sorry, Deborah, does that answer any of the question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. I realized I hadn't even asked that important question.
Now, some of my jobs in the past, I've been accused of being Susie Sunshine, the one who always says, "Oh no, it'll be great. It's going to be da 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 da." But that can be bad, right? So what happens when hope does go wrong? When, as you say, it becomes a trap rather than a lifeline? Why was it important for you to explore that, and how can leaders avoid falling into that trap?
Oh, it's a really good question, that, and I think so. There's a whole field of positive psychology, and which is part of psychology, and positive psychology isn't focused so much on. Sorry, this is going to sound really judgmental about psychology traditionally here, but one of the accusations, and sort of Martin Seligman made this originally, was that psychology had got diverted into focusing on how we can get people back up to zero if there's something wrong. And what we'd missed in the study was how we can help people thrive. So there's a whole field of positive psychology with, like thousands and thousands of papers, and the books and the papers I've got, the evidence base is just absolutely massive. But what people sometimes seem to fall for is positive thinking, which is this kind of like, Pollyanna kind of, well, look on the bright side and it'll all be okay. And kind of, we've got to turn everything into a positive. And that is misguided, because it's similar with, if we look at strengths, let's look at Gallup's Clifton Strengths. Positivity is a strength. It is a trait. And people high in positivity bring a focus on what's going right. They're upbeat. It's great to be around people that are high in positivity. But Ken, if you over-index that and overuse it, what can happen? There's research by Friedland that suggests that when we overuse strengths, it leads to positive emotions, but negative outcomes. In other words, it feels great in the moment, but actually it's damaging. And I'm naturally high in positivity. Give me Mission Impossible, and I'll be like, yeah, it'll be great. I'm sure we'll be okay. And my natural tendency is maybe to stray into toxic positivity. And in toxic positivity, we invalidate people's emotions and concerns. We kind of tell people to, shush, we're not interested in that. We sort of almost force people to fall into the let's look at what's right. And we miss out on information, the concerns that helps us get to a better outcome. And so, toxic positivity on its own doesn't inspire hope. It may do in the short term, but then people sort of switch off to it. But at the same time, sort of doom and gloom, they're kind of like, oh, it's really bad. We don't know what we're going to do. That doesn't inspire hope. So one of the things I've tried to get across loud and clear in the book is that, it's not about choosing between doom and gloom or toxic positivity. We need to both lean into the vision of a positive future and embrace the challenges along the way, because that increases the hope and it increases the likelihood that we're going to get there.
I was going to share something when I remember during the pandemic, I was on one of those, everybody jumped on calls. There was like 25 of us, all of our faces on a call. And the person facilitating went around and said, how are you feeling? How are you feeling? And this was during lockdown, our first lockdown. And everyone was going, great, I'm doing great. I'm doing great. It got to me and I'm like, I'm doing shit, actually. We don't know what's going on. I'm not, I didn't like moan and groan, but I was just honest. But the great thing about it is all of a sudden the conversation changed and it turned into what can we do to help ourselves feel better during this time, instead of sugarcoating it like, oh yeah, we're all doing great, instead of admitting that we're not doing great.
Absolutely. And the sugarcoating, it's like one of the things I'm really interested in, and in fact I'm doing more research on now, is about how we can help hope to thrive in community. And where people are struggling, where people are engaged in emotional labour, we know that that's difficult for us. And if we've got to then pretend that we're okay, we've got to engage in, it's Arlie Hothschild's work, we've got to engage in surface acting and deep acting. In other words, not only are we struggling with something, now we've got to kid ourselves that we're okay, and then we've got to kid others that we're okay. And the solution is talk and be open. And in doing what you did then, Deborah, you've role modelled that vulnerability, and you've created the conditions for other people to open up. And that's really, really powerful.
I haven't even read the book yet. Now, who knows what I'd do? Anyway.
Absolutely.
Should I move on to the next question, Ken, or did you have something
Yeah, no,
about that point? Is that okay?
go ahead and move on. I'm looking at the clock. We need to
Okay,
pick
sorry.
up our pace.
It's just such a brilliant conversation. We're going to have to do like 3 more parts of it. I'm going to jump into action because I am the kind of person who I do love a really practical, tangible tool. And I've already shared your Hope play sheet, which comes from your book with like, I don't know how many people I've shared it with. Can you maybe just talk a little bit about, why you came up with this model, what it is and how people can use it? All in 2 minutes now. Just kidding. Yeah.
Well, so the Hope play sheet is something that I have created in one of my first bits of academic research to try and sort of almost help people put hope on autopilot. Kind of like to just because we've said hope is teachable, hope is learnable. So it's a framework that helps people to find hope. And so, again, really simple. It just takes people through what are you hoping for? What's the outcome that you want here? What are both the options to get there and also the obstacles that will get in your way? Then to come up with a plan and then to anticipate how they can engage, how they can show up and take the steps to do that. So it's really simple. I've made it available. It's just, you can find it and download it as a PDF on my website. And I'm really pleased about how it's being used. And it's being used as a coaching tool and it's being used as a self-coaching tool. So practically, managers can use it for themselves to find their own hope, but they can also use it to coach and empower others. I try to practice what I preach. Why wouldn't I if I believe in this stuff? So I use the Hope play sheet in the writing of the book. I use the Hope play sheet to help me launch the book. I'm using the Hope play sheet to help me with how I am promoting the book now. And I've talked about my own sort of physio, my own injury. My dog, who competes in agility, Buddy, picked up a fairly significant injury last year, an iliopsoas strain, which means that I didn't think I'd actually get him back to competing in agility. I used the Hope play sheet because he's a much happier dog. He wants to run. We were competing at the weekend, and every time we walked past the venue without going in, he would pull me towards the venue. It's like, kind of, let me back to it. I want more. I want to, jump some tunnels. So I used the Hope play sheet with how to help him to get back and to, try and do everything we could to get him back to competing. I did a video, I think, on New Year's Eve about what I was hoping for to achieve in 2026. And I am doing more research. I am considering a second book. But also, one of the things that I set as a hope for this year is that I hoped that Buddy in agility and steeplechase could get up to champion. And that was a massive, massive stretch target. There's beginners, there's novice, there's senior, and there's champion. Anyway, guess what we did this weekend?
No way.
We hit champion. Yeah, absolutely. So, but I use the Hope play sheet, just as a simple coaching tool to help us do that. And actually now, if Buddy gets 10 more wins, this sounds really embarrassing to say out loud, he actually gets to have letters after his name on the show schedule then whenever he appears. So it's kind of like in a recognition of that as a I think it's win champion of steeplechase then. So it's so the Hope play sheet is a really simple tool that I'm making freely available. You don't have to buy the book. Well, it's great if you do, just to try and help people help themselves and help other people.
And it fills the gap already. You talking about not having, leaders not having the skills. So there you go. It can be used for dogs, people, anything. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm just really, really worried for your relationship with Buddy, because once he has the letters after his name, is it going to go to his head? Is he going to make you stand up when he comes into a room? I mean,
yeah, well, but see, I've got more letters after my name than he has
then.
So,
okay.
He's going to have to pick up quite a few titles before he before he beats that, and then maybe it'll encourage me to step up my game as well in that case as well.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
Now, moving on the cover of your book, you say why realistic optimism is essential for effective leadership. Now,
There you go.
what
That's
is
what it
realistic?
says.
What does realistic optimism look like, and why is it so important for leaders to find that middle ground between doom and gloom and toxic positivity?
It's about was it the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? Am I quoting the right book that talks
Yeah, it's the
about
right book.
the genius of the and? You know, where you can hold two things to be true at the same time, and it's about that. You know, embracing both the negativity and the positivity as well. I've not said this out loud so far, but I've been a little bit imprecise in the title deliberately because, like, people use the term optimistic and hopeful all the time. You know, I often find it in the same sentence. People say, I'm optimistic and hopeful. And I resist the temptation to challenge them and say, what do you actually mean by that? And why you've said both, because they're different. So I've been a little imprecise because optimism is a belief that the future's going to be better, you know, without you doing anything. So, you know, we could be optimistic about health or kind of the world or something like that. So optimism is about a positive feeling about things that are beyond our control, whereas hope is a belief that the future is going to be better and knowing what we can do to make it so. You know, so we're stakeholders in it, we play a part. So, but I deliberately wanted to get the word in there. So even though I've used it in an imprecise way, because people talk about optimism and hope and conflate them all the time. So I think I need to write a few more blog posts to actually talk about the difference but between them, because to try and help people be more precise with the language. But yeah, realistic optimism is about thinking big, being positive, but leaning into the negative as well. But it definitely does not rule out being audacious. You know, we can hope for things that are, you know, seem ridiculous and audacious. You know, we can go for those moonshots as well. I don't know, Ken, have I answered that question? It's like,
I think so. I mean, when we were talking about the preparation for our book, one of the things that we ran into time and again is you cannot over-index on any one thing. You can't be always in this example. You can't always be positive because you have to be pragmatic and observant of where you truly are today. You can't get to where you want to go if you don't realize you have to pick yourself up, and then you have to put this out of your way, and then you have to sort this out before you can get to that place.
2 examples on that. So it's like, so one, you know, perhaps not that cheerful, but when you look at like end of life care, people where people in end of life care have a hope intervention, it helps to reduce anxiety and depression. And now that's not to say that when somebody's terminally ill, you know, they suddenly believe that there's a mistaken diagnosis. It's that people actually take control and play the cards that dealt. And, you know, I've heard lots of stories about people who, when they're terminally ill, focused on a good death, focused on dying in the way they wanted to, on their terms, surrounded by people that they love. So I know that's not the most cheerful conversation, but even in those, the most difficult of conversations, you know, people can still have hope. It can still be there. But also the negative, leaning into the negative can change the outcome. So probably my favourite example, you know, the documentary on Netflix about the Fyre Festival, where there was that doomed festival on the island that's famous for the sort of the photos of the polystyrene boxes with soggy sandwiches. There's a video of a Zoom call a few weeks before it with an employee saying, look, we've got to do something serious here. There's so many things wrong. And he listed some of the things that were wrong. And he was cut off just at mid-conversation by a more senior person who said, hey, we're not a problems organisation, we're a solutions one. And it was like, if you'd have listened to it and taken action, you could have had a positive outcome. So leaning into the negative and the concerns can massively increase the chances of getting a positive outcome that you really are hoping for.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
That's a really good connection to my next question, which is what can leaders do? So that what you just said, I think, is perfect about leaning into it. also being intentional about it. You've talked about being intentional about it. Sometimes even just saying it out loud. So if you had these leaders and you want them to, take away, they're obviously going to read your book, but the highlights of what they can do, what small things can they start doing like tomorrow with their teams?
Let's get down to some really basic things. Find your own hope first. Start with you. I don't think you can fake authenticity. I've tried to stand up and sort of unite people around something that I've not entirely believed in myself, and it's like I can't fake that. I'm not doing that again. So find your own hope first. Also, emotional contagion is a thing. Emotions spread, and so in the same way that negativity and concern can spread around a team, hope can spread as well. So think about optimizing for hope, thinking about how you can spread that. Some very practical stuff. Sometimes things are tough, and sometimes you go through the messy middle, of a change program. Look out for the glimmers of hope. Glimmers of hope are those little things that give you an indication that we're going to be okay. Look out for them, spot them, amplify them, spread them. Celebrate people's strengths. I think you do amazing work in this, in helping about appreciation. So because we don't, if you look at the psychology that underpins strengths by definition are things that are effortless to us. So because they're effortless, often we don't even realize them or we don't notice them. So do what you talk about, appreciate people so that you help people celebrate their own strengths. Coach people, don't try and just tell them what to do, but coach them. But particularly reframe failure. Like one of the things that I've written in the book is about, in every situation, we either succeed or learn. And that is easier to say than it is to do. I've entered for a few book awards at the moment, and I'm going to the shortlisting for one of them in a few weeks in London. And either I get shortlisted, in which case I'm called to the front for loads of photographs and I'm going to get loads of amazing photos and be buzzing, or I don't. And I will tell you what, my natural position, if I don't get shortlisted, my default position is that I will be devastated. I will be gutted. I would treat it as if it's like an utter failure. And I'm going to have to practice what I preach. We succeed or learn. If I'm there for the book awards and I don't get shortlisted, do you know what? I'm there. That's a success. And actually, it'll be a load of learning, and there's a lot for me to celebrate. So
I'm gonna share something with you on that one, because Ken and I went to book awards, and I'm exactly like you. And Ken almost put in place the hope framework. He goes, get something out of this, and he gave me a goal for the. He goes, we might not be shortlisted, but go meet 5 amazing new people that day. And do you know what? In that particular situation, we weren't shortlisted, and I still had an amazing time. So. See, we used your framework. We found hope in losing.
And it's that. It's that. And actually, do you know what? I've got an idea that I've just been mulling over today, which is if I don't get shortlisted, I might get together with some other people that haven't been shortlisted, and we might record a mini podcast about how to reframe failure. So I'm thinking, at least I'll come out of it with some learning and some content. But it's key, if I come away from something feeling like a failure and licking my wounds, I'm not filled with hope, and that kind of that sense of hopelessness can spread, to other areas of our life as well. So like the next day I'll come home and I'm like, I'm not going to bother getting on the bike, maybe I'm never going to do Everesting. It's kind of, we don't want it to spread. So yeah, so that'd be it. Find your own hope first. Think about spreading hope. Look for the glimmers. Appreciate people, to your points, and celebrate strengths. Coach, and remember, we succeed or learn, and really make an effort to lead by example on that one.
Love it. I wish we had time to dig deep on each of them, but yeah.
Sadly, that's the worst part of any conversation, is realizing we don't have any more time. Ian, how can people contact you, find you, research what you're up to? How can they hear about more?
I've got a website called hope.tips. So hope.tips, which is a companion website to the book. So I've put the Hope play sheet there, and I'm creating a lot more content, which is going on there to support, really just to help people to promote hope. I'm on LinkedIn, Ian B. Pettigrew, and the book is on LinkedIn. You can find Hope is a Strategy as a LinkedIn company page, and Hope is a Strategy book on Instagram as well.
And it's already in different languages, so go, Ian. It's spreading the word globally. Fantastic.
Actually, it isn't yet, I don't think.
Well, I thought it was, but it's being sold in other countries. There you go. It is being sold in other countries, yes.
Yeah, one day.
Yes.
An audiobook on the way.
Fantastic.
Let's cross our fingers and hope, right?
Yeah. We'll put it in
Oh,
framework.
no. We don't need any crossing fingers for hope.
No.
Okay.
We'll come up with the play sheet. Ken and I did an audiobook of our book, so we can help you fill out the 4 steps on how to do it. So, yes.
Wonderful.
Well, brilliant. Thank you so much. We've really enjoyed this. Again, we could talk for so long about it. It's such an important topic. And you are right. The more you can help everybody as a leader, as a human, improve the skills of hope, the better we're all going to be individually and collectively. So thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me on here. Wonderful to spend time with both of you.
Brilliant.
Our pleasure. See you around. Okay. Now, Deb.
And that's a wrap on this episode of Corey-osity Unleashed. Huge thanks to our amazing guest and, of course, to you for tuning in.
We hope you picked up some useful tips. And hey, if this episode sparked a minor existential crisis because you realized, oops, you might be guilty of this at your company, don't panic. We've got your back.
From consulting and leadership workshops to our one-of-a-kind 360-degree feedback tool, we're here to help you and your leaders step it up.
Let's keep the conversation going. Connect with us on LinkedIn, visit stepituphr.com, subscribe to the podcast, or drop us a line at info@stepituphr.com. Together we can make work for our people, our leaders, and our businesses.
So until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and keep unleashing that curiosity.